The announcement came between the appetizer and the main course, which was exactly the kind of timing Griffin Mast would choose. When nobody could leave without making a scene, Addie Sutton had been holding her champagne glass for 40 minutes without drinking from it. Force of habit. At company events, she tended to look busier than she was, which usually meant holding something, nodding at the right moments, and angling her body so the camera didn't catch the full picture. 3 years of working the financials for Veronica Group had taught her how to take up just enough space to be useful, and just little enough not to be noticed. Griffin had called it modesty. She had called it surviving. The gala was held on the 42nd floor of the Whitmore Tower. 200 guests, candlelight bouncing off floor-to-ceiling glass, Chicago spread out below them like something out of a dream. Addie had reconciled the vendor invoices for this event herself. She knew exactly what each centerpiece cost, what the wait staff were being paid, what the open bar would run by midnight. She knew every number in the room except the one that mattered. How many people were about to watch her humiliation? Griffin tapped his fork against his glass. The room quieted. "I want to take a moment," he said, his voice carrying with the comfortable ease of a man who had always expected rooms to listen, to announce something personal. Addie looked up. He wasn't looking at her. "Some of you know I've been navigating a transition in my personal life." He smiled, the practiced kind, the kind he used in pitch meetings. "I've realized that in order to step into the next chapter professionally, I needed to make a decision about where my heart actually is." The woman to his right shifted in her chair. Slim, dark-haired, a junior publicist named Blair, who had joined Veronica Group 4 months ago. She did not look surprised. Addie's champagne glass was still warm from her hand. "To building honest futures," Griffin said, raising his glass. His eyes finally found Addie across the table. Not with guilt. Not even with regret. With the particular expression of a man who believed he was doing someone a favor by being clear. Nobody toasted. A few glasses lifted, then lowered uncertainly. The silence lasted 3 full seconds. Long enough for everyone in the room to understand what had just happened, and not long enough for anyone to figure out what to do about it. Addie set her glass down with great care. She was aware of the cameras. She was aware of Marcy from PR watching her from across the room. She was aware that her face had gone very still, which was its own kind of betrayal, because it meant everyone could see exactly how hard she was working, not to react. She stood. She wasn't sure what she planned to do. Walk out, maybe, or find the restroom, or simply stop existing in that particular square footage of the universe. But her legs moved and her chair pushed back, and she made it approximately 2 steps before the room shifted in a way she didn't immediately understand. A man she didn't recognize had risen from a table near the window. He was tall, mid-40s maybe, though something about him made age feel irrelevant. Dark suit, no tie, a stillness to him that seemed to quiet the air around wherever he stood. He moved through the room without hurrying, and the strange thing was that people moved out of his way without seeming to decide to. He stopped beside her. Not in front of her, beside her. He didn't say anything at first. He simply stood there, at a close enough distance to make it clear he had chosen this position deliberately, and looked across the table at Griffin Mast with an expression so unremarkable that it was somehow the most frightening thing Addie had ever seen. Griffin's composure slipped for the first time all evening. "I'm sorry? Who are you?" The room had gone completely quiet. 2 men near the door. Men who had been standing with the particular stillness of people who were not guests. Straightened almost imperceptibly. Someone at the far end of the room said, in a voice low enough that it might have been meant to be private, "That's Bastian Corvo." The name rippled through the room the way a stone ripples water. Fast and in all directions at once. Addie watched it happen. She watched the color leave Griffin's face. Veronica Group had a parent company. The parent company had a holding entity. The holding entity was one of several businesses Bastian Corvo controlled. Addie had seen his name at the top of exactly one document in 3 years, buried in a corporate filing she'd cross-referenced during a tax audit. She had noted it and moved on, the way accountants moved on from names that weren't their problem. He appeared to be her problem now. "Your numbers have been wrong for 14 months, Bastian said, still looking at Griffin. His voice was low and entirely level. Not her numbers. Yours. She caught the discrepancy 6 weeks ago and filed a memo that was never acted on. A pause. I acted on it this morning. Griffin opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Bastian turned to Addie. Can you walk? It was the same question she'd been asking herself for the past 90 seconds. She surprised herself by answering. Yes. Good. He didn't offer his hand. He gestured, open-palmed, in the direction of the exit, giving her the choice of whether to move and simply making clear he would move with her either way. She moved. They didn't speak in the elevator. Addie stared at the brass doors and focused on breathing at a rate that wouldn't embarrass her. Bastian stood 2 feet away and looked straight ahead. When the lobby opened around them, a black car was already waiting. The driver didn't ask where to. He already knew. Inside the car, the city slid past the windows in long amber streaks. Addie kept her hands folded in her lap and tried to calculate the damage. To her job, to her reputation, to the careful, invisible life she'd built by making herself small enough that nothing could touch her. You should know, she said finally, that I had no idea you were in that room. I know. I wasn't performing anything. I know that too. She looked at him. Then what were you doing up there? Bastian considered the question as if it were worth considering. Something I should have done 6 weeks ago, when your memo crossed my desk. Addie frowned. You read it? I read everything with your name on it. The sentence arrived with such casual certainty that it took her a moment to process it. She stopped. That's a strange thing to say. It's the truth. We've never met. No. He looked out the window. But I've been watching how you work for almost 2 years. She stared at the side of his face. The audits. Among other things. Other things, she repeated. Like what? He was quiet long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, last February. The Lakeshore Property quarterly close. You stayed until 2 in the morning because one of your junior staff made a $600 error and you wouldn't let them be blamed for it in the morning report. Addie blinked. You fixed the error yourself and listed it as a reconciliation adjustment. You told the junior staff member privately what had happened and how to avoid it in the future. He glanced at her. You didn't tell your manager. You didn't use it later. She had completely forgotten that night. That was a mistake anyone could make. Yes, most managers don't absorb the consequences. It wasn't. She exhaled. It was $600. It wasn't worth ruining someone's performance review over. No, something shifted at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't. The car moved through a yellow light. Chicago's river caught the bridge lights below and held them, broken in the current. Addie looked down at her hands. How long did Griffin know you were in that room? He didn't. So the timing was coincidental. For him, Bastian said, not for me. She processed that. You came to that gala because of me. I came because I was told it was the annual review event, and I wanted to see how Veronica Group managed its people. A pause. I got my answer. The car came to a stop in front of her building. Addie didn't move immediately. I've been with Griffin for 2 years, she said. Not a defense, not an accusation, just a fact that needed to exist somewhere outside of her own head. I thought we were. She stopped. What she couldn't say was, she had known. On some level, she had always known. She'd felt it in the way he'd started suggesting she skipped the office photos, in the way he'd begun referring to her as my colleague, rather than my girlfriend at industry events, in the slow erosion of the word us from his vocabulary. She had translated all of it into personal failure and worked harder to compensate. Longer hours, better numbers, more precise reports, as if competence could manufacture love from someone who had already withdrawn it. He used to send me articles, she said, workout routines, meal plans. She almost laughed. He'd say, "Think how good you'd feel." Not think how you'd feel, think how good, as if my body was the first draft and I just needed to revise it. Bastian said nothing. I stopped ordering anything from the bread basket 3 years ago. I used to love bread. She shook her head slowly. I stopped ordering dessert at business dinners. I started wearing darker colors. I started booking the tables in the back. She paused. I became very good at being invisible. The quiet inside the car was not empty. It had weight, texture. And yet, Bastian said, the only person in that building whose work I've read twice is yours. She turned to look at him. Not because I was looking for problems, he said. Because the first time I read it, I wanted to understand how someone could be that precise and that thorough without a single line of self-promotion. He held her gaze. Most people in your position spend as much time making sure the right people notice their work as they do doing it. You just did it. I didn't think anyone was watching. I know, he said it quietly. That's the only reason I trusted what I was seeing. 3 weeks passed. Addie went back to work. The memo she'd filed 6 weeks earlier had apparently prompted something significant. 2 senior managers were reassigned. A third was let go, and Griffin Mast's employment was terminated effective the morning after the gala. Nobody told Addie directly. She found out the way she found out most things, by reading between the numbers. Bastian sent no messages. He simply appeared. With the same unhurried certainty he moved with everywhere when their paths crossed. Once at a board review she'd been asked to present at, once at a building walkthrough for a new property acquisition. He never lingered. He always noticed. He noticed when she presented her findings without apologizing for them. He noticed when she stopped booking the tables in the back. He didn't comment on either. The Veronica Group held its quarterly investor dinner 6 weeks after the gala. A smaller event, 40 guests, one of the private dining rooms on the 7th floor. Addie had coordinated the seating chart. She knew every placement. She did not know that Griffin Mast would walk in at 8:15 with a guest badge and a story about needing to retrieve personal items from his former office. He found her at the far end of the room, reviewing a service timeline with the floor manager. Addie. He said her name the way he always had, with a faint upward lilt that suggested she was lucky to be called. I think we should talk. The floor manager excused himself with the instinct of a man who understood the assignment. I've been doing some thinking, Griffin continued. He was using the voice she recognized from the early years, the one that had convinced her she was being chosen. I handled things badly. At the gala. I know that. She waited. I was under a lot of pressure. The transition, the restructuring, he exhaled. I made you collateral damage, and that wasn't fair. No, she agreed, it wasn't. He took half a step closer. I miss you. I think we were good together. She looked at him for a long moment. She searched herself for the familiar pull, the reflex toward forgiveness, the impulse to say it's okay, and mean the version that pretended things hadn't happened. She found neither. What she found instead was clarity. He was not here because he missed her. He was here because he had since learned exactly whose company she worked for and what her proximity to that company might mean for him. She was about to speak when she became aware of Bastian Corvo standing 15 feet away. He had not moved toward them. He was simply present, the way he was always simply present, and Griffin's posture changed the moment he registered it. "Mr. Mast." Bastian's voice was pleasant, dangerously pleasant. "You've been escorted past the lobby twice. The third time is a police matter." Griffin's jaw tightened. He looked at Addie. "You don't have to let him." "She doesn't have to do anything," Bastian said. Not loudly. He didn't need volume. "That's the part you've never understood about her." Griffin looked between them. Whatever calculation he ran, it didn't resolve in his favor. He left. Addie exhaled slowly. The room's ambient noise filtered back in around the edges. Silverware, conversation, the soft percussion of a jazz trio somewhere near the bar. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "No," Bastian agreed. "I was going to send him away myself." "I know." He moved to stand beside her. Beside, not in front of, not behind. "I watched you decide to." She turned to look at him properly. "You watch me a lot." "I pay attention to things worth paying attention to." She was quiet for a moment. Then, without fully planning to, "What did you actually see at those events, before we ever spoke?" Bastian reached into the interior pocket of his jacket and produced something small, a folded piece of paper, worn at the corners from handling. She recognized her own handwriting before she even unfolded it. It was a note she'd written 14 months ago, tucked inside a final paycheck envelope for a dishwasher named Eddie Ramos, who had been let go when one of the Veronica properties closed. The accounting department processed severance through direct deposit. Addie had made sure the math was exact. Every hour, every tip-share allocation. Then she'd printed the stub, written the note by hand because she hadn't known what else to do, and left it with the envelope. "Eddie, your work made every number I touched easier. The math was right because you were. I hope the next place knows what it has." She had never expected anyone to read it. It was nothing. It was the smallest possible thing. "Where did you get this?" she asked. Eddie gave it to his sister. His sister works front of house at the Riverside property. He paused. She framed it. The frame fell once and the glass broke. She wanted a replacement copy. She asked the manager. The manager found the accounting reference number and filed a records request. He looked at her steadily. "It found its way to me." "That was 14 months ago." "Yes." "You've been carrying it." "I had a reason to." Addie looked down at the note in her hands. The small artifact of an ordinary act she'd performed alone with no audience. In the brief window between closing the accounts and going home and to an apartment where Griffin Mast would later ask her whether she'd considered the new spin class on Michigan Avenue. "I don't know what to do with this," she said. "You don't have to do anything with it." He folded it carefully and offered it back. "I only wanted you to know that someone saw." She took it, held it. The paper was warm from his pocket. "What do you want from me?" she asked. It wasn't an accusation. It was the most honest question she'd asked anyone in 2 years. Bastian was quiet for long enough that she knew the answer had been considered before this moment. "Nothing you haven't already given. I want to know you. I want to be someone you trust with the things you stopped explaining to people who used them against you." She felt the familiar prickle behind her eyes and refused to cry in a room with 40 investors. She settled for breathing. "I've spent a long time trying to be smaller," she said. "I know. It didn't work. I know that too." A waiter moved through the far end of the room with a fresh tray of wine. Addie automatically noted that the third glass from the left was overfilled and would spill before it reached a table. She said nothing. Then she thought about Eddie Ramos. About 2 a.m. in February, correcting a $600 error for a junior accountant who would have carried the guilt of it for months. About every small, unremarkable act of care she had performed in empty rooms for years, believing they didn't count because no one with any power had ever seen them. Someone had. She looked at Bastian Corvo, the kind of man, who could buy the building they were standing in, and still had apparently spent 14 months carrying a folded piece of paper because it reminded him that genuinely good people existed. She had never considered the possibility that being chosen could feel like this. Not like being approved of, like being recognized. "I'm not going to be easy," she said, not a warning. A fact. "I have years of unlearning to do, and I'm going to get it wrong, and I'm terrible at asking for help. I'm aware." "You're not worried about that?" "No." She exhaled slowly. Why not? He looked at her the way he always looked at her, like she was information he had already verified and found correct. "Because I've seen what you do when no one's watching. The hard part is never going to be who you are." The faintest shift at the corner of his mouth. "The hard part was always going to be convincing you of it." The jazz trio had moved into something slower. Around them, the dinner was settling into its second hour. Rising from a corner table, the clink of glasses, the ordinary, beautiful noise of people at ease. Addie Sutton was not entirely at ease. But for the first time in a very long time, she was not afraid of taking up exactly the amount of space she occupied. She extended her hand. Not tentatively, not provisionally, the way she signed off on a report she was certain of, cleanly and without apology. Bastian took it. Outside the windows, the Chicago River moved through the city the way it always had, catching the light of things taller and brighter than itself, and holding them, steadily, without letting go.